The day began like any other, with the hall slowly filling with hopeful faces and the sound of shuffling papers, quiet whispers, and nervous sighs. The music auditorium was old but dignified, with high ceilings that held the echo of countless performances over the years. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling on the polished wooden floor and illuminating the rows of chairs. Everyone had come for the audition, some with polished instruments and confident smiles, others clutching their cases as though they were fragile treasures. Among them was a man known for his sharp ears and even sharper judgments. He had spent decades training musicians, coaching them to reach professional levels, and judging countless competitions. His reputation was such that a nod from him could open doors, and a dismissive shake of the head could close them forever. He entered the hall with calm authority, his posture straight and his eyes scanning the crowd. A few of the contestants had already begun warming up. The sound of a piano practice echoed faintly from the corner, the notes floating through the air with careless charm, while a violinist attempted a scale that was not quite even. Some performers were confident, others unsure, but he moved with the practiced air of someone who had seen it all before. To him, this would be just another day of hearing hopeful amateurs, a routine that had become familiar over the years. He sat at the judging table, tapping a pen against a stack of papers, ready to mark down names and impressions as he looked across the room. His eyes settled on a young woman standing near the back, almost at the edge of the crowd. She was not strikingly dressed, not in the sort of fashionable clothing that some contestants wore to impress judges. Her clothes were simple, slightly worn at the edges, but clean and carefully put together. She held a violin case with both hands, close to her chest, as if it were a shield against the world. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she avoided looking directly at anyone, her gaze dropping to the floor most of the time. To him, she seemed like just another nervous beginner, unsure of herself, maybe even someone who shouldn't have been there. He made a small mental note, almost dismissively, and returned his attention to the people in front of him, making quick assessments and jotting down what he saw. The hall was slowly filling with spectators. Friends, parents, and fellow musicians found seats, whispering excitedly among themselves. Some contestants were talking loudly, trying to calm their nerves with jokes and laughter. The young woman at the back did not speak. She simply stood quietly, waiting for her turn, clutching her violin case as though it contained not only her instrument, but her very soul. Every now and then, she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, careful not to draw attention to herself. It was clear she was aware of the other contestants, their confident postures, their polished techniques, but she did not compare herself to them. She seemed to be focusing inward, gathering her courage, holding herself together with quiet determination. The coach watched the contestants one by one, some playing beautifully, others faltering, some charming the audience, others failing to leave any impression. He tapped his pen against his notebook, his eyes occasionally narrowing or widening depending on the performance. Most of the people who walked up to the stage seemed ordinary to him. Some had talent but lacked discipline. Others had confidence but no depth. He leaned back slightly in his chair, already imagining the young woman at the back, the one he had barely noticed. In his mind, she was likely just a beginner, perhaps lucky to be in this audition at all. He almost smiled at the thought that she would never surprise him. But there was something different about her stance, subtle as it was. Her shoulders were tense, yet there was a quiet pride in the way she held herself. She did not fidget as the others did, nor did she glance at the instruments around her with envy or longing. Instead, she seemed completely focused on the moment ahead, on the act she was about to perform, and nothing else. It was easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. And he almost didn't. He was, after all, expecting just another ordinary performance. Meanwhile, the young woman's mind was far away from the judgment. far away from the whispered conversations and polite applause that greeted the others. She thought about the long nights she had spent practicing in her small room, her fingers aching, her back stiff, her eyes tired from reading sheet music by the dim light of a single lamp. She remembered the first time she held a violin as a child, the way the strings had felt cold under her fingers, the way the sound had trembled and cracked. She thought about the years she had gone without performing for anyone, not even her family, because she had no opportunity and no one to support her. Every note she had learned had been taught by her own perseverance, every melody a testament to her determination. The coach's attention was drawn back as another contestant approached the stage. The music began, and he listened critically, evaluating technique, tone, expression. He scribbled notes, nodded once in recognition of talent, frowned at moments of weakness. The audience reacted politely, some leaning forward, others shifting in their seats, waiting for the next performance. The young woman at the back shifted slightly, her hands tightening on her violin case, feeling the tension rise inside her. She was next. Soon it would be her turn to step forward and show what she could do. Her heartbeat quickened as the person before her finished. The applause faded, and the hall became still, expectant. The coach looked up briefly, already predicting her mistakes, imagining the hesitant start, the faltering bow, the weak tone. He was certain he would barely have to take any notes to write a passing grade, or perhaps a gentle dismissal. It had been so many years since anyone had truly surprised him. He had grown used to predicting exactly how each contestant would perform, to evaluating them in a matter of minutes. The young woman stepped forward, feeling the weight of all eyes on her. Her hands were steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. She placed her violin under her chin, the familiar feel of the instrument bringing a small sense of comfort. She adjusted her bow and took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. In that moment, the world around her, the whispers, the judging pen, the audience, seemed to disappear. She thought only of the music she was about to create, the notes that had lived inside her for so long, waiting for this chance to be heard. The coach's eyes followed her, still skeptical, still expecting the usual mistakes, the usual hesitations. He leaned slightly forward, tapping his pen against his notebook. In all his years, he had learned to notice small tells, how a beginner would grip the bow too tightly, how their posture would betray uncertainty, how their tone would falter under pressure. He saw none of those signs in her. She stood there quietly, composed, almost fragile in appearance, but he dismissed it as inexperience. After all, appearances could be deceiving, and he had seen countless hopeful beginners who looked poised only to crumble at the first note. The room held its collective breath as she raised her bow. The young woman focused on the first note, the sound she had imagined for countless nights now ready to be made real. She opened her mouth to take a silent breath, positioning herself, and for a moment the hall seemed to pause. Every ear strained to hear, every eye fixed on her, yet she felt alone with her music. It was the culmination of years of dedication, practice, and silent sacrifice. No one knew her story. No one had seen the hours she spent perfecting her craft in solitude. And soon, all of that would be revealed in the simplest, yet most powerful way. The first note dot the coach's pen hovered over his notebook, his mind ready to dismiss her before she had even begun. He did not expect to be surprised, did not expect to be shaken. Yet there was a subtle difference in her stance, in the quiet confidence that radiated from her, in the way she held her instrument, as though it were part of her very being. He noticed it, but he told himself it was nothing. After all, he had seen hundreds of performers. And this was just another audition, just another day of evaluating hopeful amateurs. As she prepared to play, the audience shifted, some leaning forward in anticipation, others whispering quietly, sensing something unique in the way she carried herself. The young woman felt the tension, felt the weight of expectation, but she did not let it affect her. She thought of her own journey, of the countless hours she had spent practicing, of the moments when she wanted to give up but kept going. Every struggle, every lonely evening, every aching finger now led to this one moment. She tightened her grip on the bow and let it rest lightly against the strings, ready to let her music speak. The hall was silent, except for the faint sound of the strings under the bow's gentle pressure. The coach leaned back slightly, pen still in hand, expecting the ordinary. The young woman inhaled deeply, preparing herself, and the moment hung suspended, as though the world itself had paused to witness what would happen next. It was a simple act, a single note, but it carried the weight of years of practice, the hopes of a quiet dream, and the courage of a person who had never performed for anyone before. And in that moment, as she lifted the bow to the strings, no one in the room could have predicted what would happen. Not the coach, not the audience, not even herself. The first note, waiting in the silence, was about to break the expectations, challenge assumptions, and reveal tea. Before she ever stepped into that bright, intimidating hall, the young woman had lived a life shaped by quiet determination and unseen struggles. Music had always been her refuge, a sanctuary where the chaos of the outside world could not reach her. She remembered as a small child how her grandfather had placed a violin into her tiny hands, the wood smooth and warm, the strings tense and fragile. He had smiled gently and shown her how to hold it, how to press the strings just enough to create a sound that was pure. He never rushed her, never scolded her when she played a wrong note. Instead, he let her explore, let her learn the language of music on her own. For years, that violin had been her closest friend. She spent hours practicing in her small room, which smelled faintly of old wood and candle wax. The walls were lined with sheets of music, some torn at the edges, some carefully preserved, each one representing the countless hours she had poured into learning. Often her fingers ached, her shoulders ached, and her eyes stung from reading the small notes under the dim glow of a single lamp, but she never complained. Music was not just something she did, it was part of who she was. Her family had struggled. Money was tight, and there were days when there was barely enough for food, let alone piano lessons or violin strings. She had watched her parents work tirelessly, taking odd jobs, and she had learned early that life demanded sacrifice. Music became a personal escape, a secret world she could enter whenever the real world became too heavy. Sometimes she would sneak into the old attic, where the light fell softly through the dusty window, playing to the shadows in the quiet, imagining an audience that did not exist. In those moments, her music was perfect, unjudged, and free. School was not much different. She was quiet, often keeping to herself, and she preferred the company of her violin to the chatter of classmates. They did not understand her passion. Many dismissed her as shy or awkward, but she did not need their understanding. Music was her language, her way of speaking when words failed her. She spent lunch breaks sitting under the large oak tree in the schoolyard, practicing silently, letting the strings vibrate under her careful fingers. Even the janitor, who had noticed her playing on quiet afternoons, would stop and listen, nodding slightly in appreciation, but otherwise leaving her to her world. When her grandfather passed away, it was like a piece of her heart had been taken. He had been the one person who believed in her completely, who never doubted her, who had quietly guided her first steps into the world of music. After his death, she carried the violin with her always, and it became even more than a friend. It became a memory, a connection to someone who had loved her unconditionally. She practiced more than ever, sometimes playing late into the night, tears falling silently onto the strings, letting her grief pour into her music. In a way, the music kept him alive for her. Despite the challenges, she refused to give up. She watched videos, studied old recordings, and taught herself techniques that would have cost a fortune in lessons. There were moments of frustration, of near despair, when the notes refused to sound right or her hands would not move as she wished. But she persisted. Every time she made a mistake, she reminded herself that progress came from persistence. That mastery was earned through patience and hard work. She spent months perfecting pieces that she would never have the chance to perform publicly, practicing in secrecy, honing every note until it resonated with clarity and emotion. Her parents had little understanding of the depth of her commitment. They were proud in their way, but the practicalities of life always came first. When friends invited her to parties or gatherings, she often declined, preferring to remain in her room with her violin. She did not mind being alone. Music was her companion, a friend who never judged, who never left her, who responded to her touch and her heart in a way that no one else could. She often imagined performing one day, playing for people who would hear the music she had carried inside for so long. It was a dream that seemed distant, almost impossible, yet it burned quietly, a flame she kept alive with every practice session. Her opportunity had come unexpectedly. A friend of a friend had mentioned an audition in the nearby town, a chance to perform in front of professional judges, to show what she could do. At first, she hesitated. She had never performed for strangers, never stepped into a room where her music would be judged. Fear pressed against her chest like a heavy weight, and doubt whispered that she was not ready. But something inside her insisted. She remembered her grandfather's gentle smile, the way he had encouraged her to believe in herself, and she made a quiet decision. She would go. She would play. The journey to the audition had been nerve-wracking. She traveled on crowded buses, holding her violin case carefully, feeling the eyes of strangers on her, but trying not to falter. She rehearsed silently in her head, imagining the notes, the flow of the music, the emotion she wanted to convey. She arrived at the hall early, before the crowd had gathered, and found a quiet corner to prepare herself. She ran her fingers over the strings, tested the bow, adjusted the chin rest, and breathed deeply, trying to calm the nerves that threatened to overwhelm her. As the hall filled with contestants and spectators, she stayed quiet, observing the others. Some were confident, chatting loudly and laughing, their instruments polished and shining. Others were nervous, like her, fidgeting or glancing repeatedly at their sheet music. She did not let herself be distracted. She focused on her goal, on the music that had lived inside her for so many years, waiting for this moment to be shared. Every fear, every hesitation, every struggle she had endured was now focused on the simple act of making music. And she embraced it. She remembered a conversation she had had with a teacher years ago, who had told her that talent alone was never enough, that perseverance, passion, and dedication were what truly mattered. She had lived by that advice, even when no one else believed in her, even when the world seemed indifferent. Every note she had learned, every piece she had mastered, was a testament to her determination, a silent proof that she could achieve something extraordinary despite the obstacles. The audition was her first chance to show it, to step into the world she had imagined for so long. As she waited for her turn, she closed her eyes and thought about her grandfather again. She imagined his hands guiding hers, his voice encouraging her, his smile giving her strength. She whispered a silent promise that she would make him proud, that she would not let fear stop her. The violin was warm under her fingers, the strings familiar, and for a moment she felt calm. The room around her faded into the background. The noise, the whispers, the skeptical glances of others, all of it disappeared. She was alone with her music, and it was enough. Her mind then shifted to the man who would judge her, the coach whose reputation preceded him. She had heard stories of his critical nature, his ability to detect every flaw, his unwillingness to be impressed easily. She did not worry about it. She did not want to impress him. She only wanted to play with honesty, to let the music speak for itself. The years of practice, the hidden sacrifices, the silent tears, all of it would come through in the sound she produced. Whether he was impressed or not was secondary. What mattered was that she had arrived at this moment, ready to share herself with the world for the first time. Other contestants were called to the stage, and she watched them play. Some were impressive, their techniques flawless, their confidence evident. Others faltered, their nerves getting the better of them. She observed quietly, learning what she could, noting the rhythm of the stage, the way the hall responded to sound, the reactions of the audience. Every detail mattered, every observation a preparation for her own performance. She felt her own anticipation build, a mixture of excitement and nervous energy, but she remained centered. Ready for her turn. The coach continued to watch her quietly, noting her position at the back of the room. In his mind, she was just another hopeful, probably nervous, probably untrained. He did not expect anything extraordinary. He tapped his pen against his notebook, unconsciously forming judgments before she had even lifted the bow. But there was a quiet confidence in her stance that caught his eye, something he could not immediately categorize. He dismissed it at first, assuming it was just posture, but a subtle curiosity began to stir. He would learn soon enough whether she was capable or not, and then the moment approached. Her turn would come. She felt the weight of her years of preparation pressing upon her, but it was not a burden. It was a reminder of her journey, of every struggle that had brought her here. She walked forward quietly, carrying her violin as though it were an extension of herself. The hall seemed larger than she remembered, the audience more intimidating, the coach's gaze sharper. Yet she did not falter. She positioned herself, took a deep breath, and prepared to open her heart through the music she had carried for so long. She was ready. The young woman stepped onto the stage, feeling the solid wooden floor beneath her feet. The hall seemed even larger from up here, the audience now closer, their faces more distinct than they had appeared from the back row. She could see some leaning forward, waiting expectantly, others with polite expressions, their hands folded in their laps. The judge sat straight at the table, pen in hand, eyes focused but showing no hint of what he was thinking. He looked ready to mark down another ordinary performance, unaware that the music about to come from her violin would challenge every expectation he had. She placed the violin under her chin carefully, adjusting it to fit comfortably, feeling the familiar weight and texture against her shoulder. She lifted the bow slowly, as though she were preparing for a conversation with an old friend. Her fingers moved with a gentle precision, remembering years of practice, hours of silent struggle, every moment that had brought her here. She closed her eyes for a brief second, letting herself breathe, letting the world fade away. The audience, the lights, the skeptical gaze of the judge, all of it disappeared, leaving only her, the violin, and the music she carried inside her. The hall was silent, except for the faint rustling of papers and the quiet shuffle of audience members. Some held their breath, sensing the tension, sensing that something important was about to happen. The young woman felt it too, a mixture of excitement and nervousness, a thrill that ran through her body like electricity. She had imagined this moment countless times, had played it over and over in her head, but the reality was different. The energy of the room, the presence of strangers, the weight of expectation, it was intense. Yet she felt grounded by her own preparation, by the knowledge that every note she was about to play had been earned. She took another deep breath and allowed her hands to settle. The bow rested lightly against the strings, and for a moment the only sound was the soft, quiet hum of her own heartbeat. She felt the violin respond to her touch, the strings alive beneath her fingers. The years of practice, the countless nights of silent struggle, The tears, the frustration, the hope, all of it converged in this single moment. She did not need to impress anyone. She only needed to be honest with the music, to let it flow naturally, to let it speak. The judge watched her carefully, still expecting the usual mistakes. In his experience, beginners always revealed themselves immediately. The tense shoulders, the uneven tone, the hesitant movements. Yet, as he observed her, something felt different. Her posture was perfect without seeming rigid. Her hands rested naturally on the violin, and there was a quiet focus in her expression that suggested she belonged here more than any other contestant he had seen that day. He shook off the thought, reminding himself that appearances could be deceiving, that nervousness could hide skill and practice could hide mistakes. She opened her eyes and looked briefly at the audience, her gaze calm and steady. She could feel their anticipation, their curiosity, their skepticism, but she did not let it affect her. She positioned the bow above the strings, ready to begin, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath with her. The silence in the hall was almost tangible, thick with expectation. The judge's pen hovered over his notebook, ready to write, ready to judge. Yet he was unaware that this performance would challenge everything he thought he knew. Her mind drifted for a brief moment to all that had brought her here. She remembered the evenings spent practicing alone, the frustration of trying to perfect difficult pieces without guidance, the small victories when a note finally sounded correct after repeated attempts. She thought of her grandfather, who had first taught her to love music, whose quiet encouragement had stayed with her long after he was gone. She thought of her parents, who had worked tirelessly to keep the family going, never fully understanding the depth of her commitment to the violin. All these memories blended into a single determination, a resolve to make this moment count. She lifted the bow just above the strings, feeling the tension in her fingers, feeling the readiness of the instrument. The audience seemed to lean forward unconsciously, sensing the gravity of what was about to happen. The coach, still skeptical, watched her movements closely, noting the careful way she positioned herself, expecting to see a hesitation, a flaw, a sign of inexperience. But there was none. She seemed calm, composed, prepared, yet there was a quiet electricity around her, an intensity that hinted at the depth of what she was about to reveal. Her fingers adjusted slightly, touching the strings with gentle precision. She felt a wave of nerves, a natural reaction to the moment, but she allowed it to pass through her without affecting her focus. She reminded herself that she knew these notes, that she had played this music countless times in her room, in solitude, without judgment. This was simply another performance, another chance to share what she had carried inside her for years. The difference was that now, people were listening. The hall seemed to shrink around her. The faces of the audience blurred, the whispering faded, the judge's sharp eyes softened into a distant observation. She was alone with her music, and that was all that mattered. She felt the violin respond under her chin, felt the bow against the strings, felt the subtle vibrations through her fingertips. She was ready. She had prepared for this her entire life, and every doubt, every fear, every moment of hesitation melted away. She thought of the opening note she had practiced endlessly, the one that would begin the piece and set the tone for everything that followed. It was simple yet powerful, a note that carried the weight of emotion she had stored for years. She imagined how it would sound, imagined the clarity, the resonance, the way it would fill the hall. She did not rush. She allowed herself a calm, measured breath, letting the anticipation build just enough to carry the note forward without fear. The judge, still observing, noticed a subtle tension in the room. Something was different about this contestant. He could not put his finger on it yet, but there was a quiet authority in the way she held herself, a confidence in her stillness, a readiness that most beginners did not possess. He leaned slightly forward, unconsciously curious, though he would not admit it to himself. The young woman seemed unaware of his scrutiny. She was focused entirely on the music, on the connection between her hands and the strings, on the sound that was about to emerge. She adjusted her position slightly, ensuring the violin rested comfortably. Her fingers ready on the fingerboard, her bow steady. She could feel her heartbeat, steady and strong, matching the rhythm she imagined in her mind. The silence around her was not empty. It was expectant, filled with the weight of anticipation, filled with the possibility of something extraordinary. She allowed herself a brief moment of clarity, reminding herself that she was ready, that she had been ready for years, and that this note, this single sound, would reveal everything she had carried inside her. The audience held their collective breath. Some leaned forward, sensing the tension, sensing that something important was about to happen. Others sat quietly, waiting to see if this young woman would falter like so many before her. The judge's pen hovered over his notebook, ready to mark the performance, expecting the usual mistakes, the hesitant tone, the nervous start. He was not prepared for what was about to unfold. She drew the bow gently across the strings, her hand steady, her fingers precise. The first note hovered in the air, fragile yet full of potential. She did not rush it. She allowed it to resonate, allowed it to fill the space, allowed the sound to carry the weight of everything she had experienced. For a moment, there was silence, not just in the room, but in her mind, as though the world had paused to listen. The note was clear, pure, and unexpectedly powerful. It was a note that spoke of patience, of struggle, of hope, of quiet determination. The audience reacted subtly at first, leaning forward, their expressions changing from polite curiosity to attentive awe. The judge's pen froze midair, his eyes widening slightly, his mind registering something he had not anticipated. This was no ordinary performance. The note carried emotion, skill, and maturity far beyond what he expected from a contestant who appeared so young and unassuming. He leaned back slightly, almost disbelieving. As the sound continued to resonate, filling the hall with a presence that demanded attention, the young woman closed her eyes briefly, feeling the note vibrate under her bow, feeling the power of the music she had nurtured for years. She allowed herself to sink into it, to let the sound flow naturally, to let the emotion guide her fingers. Every vibration of the strings carried a piece of her story, a fragment of her life, every struggle and triumph embedded in the sound. She did not play for approval. She did not play for praise. She played because it was the truest expression of herself. And the audience, whether they realized it or not, was witnessing something profound. The coach watched, unable to hide his surprise. He had seen many performers, many students, but there was a rare authenticity in her playing that he could not ignore. It was not just technical skill. It was depth, emotion, honesty. He scribbled notes, but even as he wrote, he knew the words could not capture the full impact of what he was hearing. Something extraordinary had begun, and the first note, simple yet profound, had already set the tone. The young woman's hands moved gracefully across TH. The young woman continued to play, her bow gliding effortlessly across the strings. Each note flowed naturally, yet with precision, as though the music had been waiting for this exact moment to come alive. The audience remained silent, captivated by the sound that filled the hall. It was not just the technical skill of the performance that held them, but the raw emotion behind every note. Her music carried a depth that seemed to echo beyond the walls, reaching directly into the hearts of those listening. The coach sat frozen, pen in hand, but no longer moving. He had encountered many talented performers over the years, yet he had rarely experienced anything like this. There was a purity and honesty in her playing that could not be taught, that could not be faked. He leaned slightly forward, unable to look away, realizing that he had underestimated her completely. Every expectation he had built in his mind crumbled as she continued to play. It was clear now that she had spent years developing her craft, not for recognition or applause, but because music was her life, her refuge, and her way of expressing what words could not. Her hands moved with effortless grace. The bow pressed against the strings lightly at times, producing soft, gentle sounds that seemed to linger in the air, and then with more force, creating bold, dramatic notes that filled the room with intensity. She moved between contrasting passages with fluidity, her fingers executing each shift with precision, her body swaying slightly to the rhythm without ever breaking focus. She seemed fully absorbed in the music, fully present in the moment. Yet the audience could feel every emotion. She poured into each note. There were passages of the piece that were technically demanding, sequences of notes that would challenge even advanced players. But she executed them flawlessly, each tone crisp, clear, and resonant. There was no hesitation, no faltering, only the fluidity of someone who had practiced tirelessly, who had learned not just the notes, but the meaning behind them. The audience began to lean forward, eyes wide, some holding their hands to their mouths in quiet awe. They were witnessing more than a performance. They were witnessing a revelation. A young woman sharing her life, her struggles, her triumphs, and her heart through music. The coach could not hide his reaction. He had been known for his composure, his ability to evaluate performances with detachment. But now he felt an unexpected wave of emotion. He found himself leaning forward, his pen forgotten, his mind focused entirely on the sound before him. He had believed he could predict the outcome of this audition in the first few seconds, as he always did, but he had been completely wrong. This was no ordinary contestant. This was someone extraordinary, someone whose talent and dedication had gone unnoticed until this very moment. The young woman's music began to tell a story, each phrase carrying emotion that seemed to transcend words. There were moments of melancholy, soft and haunting, as if she were recalling memories long past, moments of joy, bright and uplifting, that seemed to radiate warmth into the hall, and moments of tension, bold and urgent, that held the listeners on the edge of their seats. Every change in dynamics, every subtle variation in tempo, was deliberate, expressive, and deeply moving. The music became a bridge between her world and the audience, connecting them in a way that went beyond mere entertainment. A few audience members could not hold back tears. They wiped their eyes discreetly, unsure whether it was the power of the music or the realization that they were witnessing something rare and profound. Some held their hands over their hearts, feeling the intensity of the emotion, while others simply sat still, eyes fixed on the young woman, fully absorbed in the sound that filled the room. The music was no longer just notes on a page. It had become a living, breathing entity, carrying the essence of her life and struggles into the hearts of everyone listening. She did not pause, did not falter, as though she had become one with her instrument. The violin was no longer just wood and strings. It was an extension of herself, a voice for the emotions she had carried in silence for years. Every movement of her bow, every shift of her fingers was intentional and precise, yet infused with emotion. She allowed the music to flow naturally, letting it express the moments she could not speak about: loneliness, hope, determination, grief, and joy. The audience felt it, sensing the depth of her experiences, sensing the story woven into the sound. The coach had seen many performers in his lifetime, but very few had moved him in this way. He had heard technical skill, artistry, and emotion separately, but rarely had he heard them combined so seamlessly. It was not just the complexity of her playing, nor the clarity of the notes, but the sincerity of the emotion behind them. He realized that the first impression he had made, that she was merely a novice, had been completely wrong. He felt a humbling realization wash over him. Here was someone who had trained herself, who had faced hardships quietly, and who now stood before him, transforming those experiences into music that touched the soul. The piece began to build in intensity. The soft, delicate passages transitioned into powerful, commanding sequences, notes cascading with strength and precision. Her fingers moved with speed and accuracy, the bow producing sound after sound without hesitation. The audience was completely entranced, leaning forward, holding their breath, captivated by the performance. Even those who had been skeptical moments ago could not deny the talent, skill, and emotion radiating from the young woman on stage. She allowed herself a brief smile, though her focus never wavered. She felt the music flowing through her, connecting her past struggles with the present moment, letting her express what words could never convey. Every note was a piece of her journey, every phrase a reflection of her life, her dedication, and her perseverance. The audience could sense it, responding with quiet admiration, letting the music wash over them, leaving them both moved and inspired. The coach, too, was affected in ways he did not expect. He had judged countless auditions, had seen talent and potential, had been impressed many times, but rarely had a performance touched him so deeply. He realized that he had underestimated the young woman, judging her based on appearances rather than substance. He could feel a deep respect forming within him, a recognition of her skill, her dedication, and her courage. She was not just performing. She was sharing herself, and it was impossible not to feel the impact. The audience began to respond more visibly. A few individuals whispered softly to their neighbors, pointing out the precision and emotion, while others sat completely still, captivated by the music. Some wiped away tears, others closed their eyes, letting the sound envelop them, carrying them along the currents of the performance. Every note seemed intentional, every pause meaningful, every crescendo and decrescendo carefully shaped to create a narrative that went beyond the written score. The young woman's talent was undeniable, but it was her ability to convey emotion, to transform the music into a story that truly captivated the listeners. The hall seemed to vibrate with her performance. The violin's tone filled every corner, resonating with a clarity and warmth that drew the audience in completely. The young woman was fully absorbed in her music, her body moving with the rhythm, her expression calm yet expressive, her focus absolute. She allowed the audience to hear not just the notes, but the heart behind them, the life experiences that had shaped her, and the dedication that had brought her to this stage. The coach could not hide the emotions welling up inside him. He had been trained to remain objective, to judge with detachment, but now he found himself leaning forward, fully immersed, almost holding his breath. Every phrase of the music, every subtle nuance, challenged his expectations and demanded his full attention. He realized that he had been wrong to assume she was a novice, wrong to underestimate her, and he felt a deep sense of admiration for the skill and courage she displayed. The piece moved toward its conclusion, the music growing in intensity, the bow moving faster, the notes more complex. Yet she remained calm, precise, and expressive. Her fingers danced across the strings with confidence, every note perfectly placed, every phrase imbued with emotion. The audience could feel the culmination of years of practice, the culmination of her journey, the culmination of a lifetime of silent dedication, and they were completely captivated. When the final note rang out, there was a moment of silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, allowing the sound to linger, allowing the impact of the performance to settle over everyone present. The young woman lowered her bow slowly, her eyes opening, and she looked around the hall. The audience remained still for a moment, as though absorbing the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began, soft at first, and then growing louder, filling the hall with the sound of admiration and respect. Some audience members rose to their feet, unable to contain their appreciation. Some wiped tears from their eyes, moved deeply by the performance. The young woman stood quietly, bowing her head slightly, acknowledging the response, yet she remained composed. She had shared her heart, and the audience had recognized it. The coach, too, rose from his seat, a look of profound respect on his face. He knew that this performance would stay with him for a long time, a reminder of the power of dedication, the strength of talent, and the impact of genuine emotion. The first note had started. The applause filled the hall, rolling like waves over the audience, and finally reaching her as a warm, tangible force. She lowered her violin carefully, her hands trembling ever so slightly, though her posture remained composed. The sound of clapping, cheering, and even the occasional whisper of awe seemed almost surreal. She had never experienced anything like this before. All the years of practice and silence, all the nights spent perfecting notes alone in her room, had led to this moment. And now the world seemed to be acknowledging it. The coach remained standing, his expression unreadable for a moment. He had spent decades in music, judging countless performances, but very few had left him feeling so shaken. His pen lay forgotten on the desk, as though the paper itself no longer mattered. He had entered the audition expecting another ordinary performance, ready to evaluate and dismiss. Yet the music he had just heard had done something he had not anticipated. It had shaken him to his core. He realized he had misjudged her completely, seeing only what he thought he would see, rather than what was actually there. Audience members were still applauding, some on their feet, some whispering to neighbors about how remarkable the performance had been. A few people were visibly emotional, wiping tears from their eyes, clearly moved by what they had just experienced. Others were silent, mouths slightly open, lost in the memory of the music, trying to process the depth of emotion they had just heard. There was a stillness that lingered even after the applause had died down. A quiet acknowledgement that something extraordinary had happened. The young woman's breath came slowly, steadying herself as she absorbed the overwhelming response. Her heart raced, yet a strange calm settled over her. She had shared something deeply personal, something she had carried for years, and it had been received with admiration and respect. She felt a mixture of relief and wonder, a sensation she could not easily describe. She had imagined this moment countless times, but living it was unlike anything she had envisioned. It was bigger, more real, and infinitely more moving than she could have imagined. The coach finally sat down, leaning back slightly, as if the weight of what he had just witnessed pressed upon him. He felt humbled, reminded of why he had devoted his life to music in the first place. He realized that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, emotion, and the courage to be authentic mattered even more. He studied her quietly, taking in her composed posture, the way she held herself even after the performance, and he understood that what he had just witnessed was rare, almost exceptional. She had not only played notes on a page, she had told a story, revealed her heart, and shared a piece of herself that would stay with everyone in the room. Long after the last note had faded, some audience members began to gather their things, murmuring to one another about the experience they had shared. The young woman remained on stage for a few moments, quietly taking it all in. She felt a surge of gratitude, not only for the applause, but for the acknowledgement that her music had been understood. For years, she had practiced alone, often wondering if anyone would ever truly hear her, if anyone would ever understand the emotions she conveyed through her instrument. Now that doubt had vanished. People had felt her music, and that was more than she had ever hoped for. The coach stood and approached her cautiously, his steps deliberate. He did not rush, as though he wanted to take in the moment fully before speaking. When he reached her, he paused, studying her face, the quiet determination still shining in her eyes. He spoke softly, his voice steady, but carrying a depth of respect that could not be faked. "I misjudged you," he said. "I thought you were a beginner. I was wrong. What you just played, It is extraordinary. Your technique, your emotion, your control, it is beyond what I expected from anyone in this room." The young woman listened, a faint blush rising on her cheeks, though she maintained her calm demeanor. She had expected praise, perhaps even approval, but the sincerity in his voice struck her differently. She realized that this was not casual flattery. This was recognition from someone who had dedicated a lifetime to music and had rarely been impressed. She nodded quietly, letting the words sink in. She did not feel the need to speak immediately. The music had spoken for her, and now his acknowledgement was a quiet confirmation of what she had always believed about herself. The coach continued, his tone deliberate. "You have a gift," he said, "but more importantly, you have discipline and depth. Many people have talent, but few have the courage to practice in silence, to dedicate themselves completely, and to convey true emotion through their performance. What you did today shows both skill and heart. I want to help you develop this further, if you are willing." Her hands tightened slightly on the violin case, a mix of surprise and hope filling her. She had never imagined that someone of his experience would offer mentorship so openly, so sincerely. For years, she had practiced alone, often wondering if she would ever have the opportunity to learn from someone who truly understood music at this level. Now, that chance was being offered to her, not because of her connections or her appearance, but because of the authenticity and dedication she had demonstrated through her music. She spoke softly, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I would be honored," she said. "I have learned on my own for years, and I want to improve, to grow, to share my music with the world. I want to learn from someone who understands." The coach nodded, his eyes reflecting both pride and admiration. "Then we will begin," he said. "But know this, your journey has only just started. What you showed today is a glimpse of your potential. There is much more to explore, much more to achieve. And I will guide you, but the dedication must continue. You must never lose sight of the discipline and passion that brought you here." She nodded again, a sense of determination rising within her. She had worked alone for so long, and now she had the guidance she needed to reach a level she had only dreamed of. Her heart swelled with gratitude and excitement, but also with an understanding of the work that lay ahead. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. A new chapter in her life, filled with possibility. Meanwhile, the audience began to disperse slowly, some lingering to speak quietly to each other, still processing what they had witnessed. A few approached her after the performance, complimenting her skill and asking questions about her training. She responded politely, modestly, knowing that words could never fully capture the depth of what had just happened. The experience itself, the act of performing, of sharing her music, and of receiving genuine acknowledgement was more important than any praise she could receive. The coach remained nearby, watching as she interacted with the audience. He noted the calm confidence she exhibited, the way she listened to questions and responded thoughtfully, never boasting, never seeking attention. He realized that her humility was part of what made her music so compelling. Talent combined with modesty and sincerity created a rare and powerful presence, one that inspired and moved people without even trying. As the hall began to empty, he motioned for her to join him at the judging table. They spoke quietly, discussing future lessons, potential performance opportunities, and ways to further develop her skill. He shared insights from his decades of experience, explaining techniques, approaches to practice, and the nuances of expression that could elevate her music even further. She listened intently, absorbing every word, grateful for the opportunity to learn from someone who had seen so much, yet was willing to invest his time and energy in her growth. The young woman realized that her life had changed in ways she had never anticipated. Just hours ago, she had been a hopeful contestant, nervous and uncertain. Now, She had not only proven herself to an experienced judge, but had also gained the guidance of someone who could help her reach her full potential. She felt a sense of purpose and direction that had been missing for years. Her dream of sharing her music with the world, once distant and fragile, now seemed tangible and achievable. The coach smiled as he observed her reaction, noting the mix of humility, determination, and excitement in her expression. He had seen many young musicians, but few had the combination of talent, discipline, and emotional depth that she possessed. He felt a sense of responsibility to guide her, to ensure that her potential would not be wasted, and to help her navigate the path from a skilled amateur to a true artist capable of moving people with her music. As they continued to speak, the young woman felt a quiet confidence building within her. She knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, that there would be moments of doubt, frustration, and exhaustion. But she also knew that she had the skills, the dedication, and now the mentorship to overcome these obstacles. She felt a deep sense of purpose, a clarity that had been missing for so long. Her music was no longer just a private sanctuary. It was a path forward, a bridge to a future she had always dreamed of, but never thought possible. By the time they left the hall, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city. The young woman carried her violin case carefully, feeling its weight not as a burden, but as a reminder of her journey. Each step she took was filled with quiet determination and anticipation for what lay ahead. She thought about the lessons she would learn, the performances she would. The days after her performance passed in a blur of new experiences, each one different from anything she had known before. The young woman found herself walking through the streets of her town with a quiet sense of confidence she had never felt. People seemed to notice her differently, offering small smiles, polite nods, and occasionally a comment about her talent. She had always been unnoticed in many ways, blending into the background, but now the world seemed to see her, truly see her, as someone capable of extraordinary things. Her lessons with the coach became a part of her daily life. Each session was a combination of discipline and discovery. He pushed her, guiding her to refine techniques she had already mastered alone, and introducing new challenges that stretched her abilities in unexpected ways. She learned to approach music not just with precision, but with creativity, exploring variations, expression, and interpretation. Every day was an opportunity to grow, and she embraced it with a dedication that surprised even her mentor. At first, the new attention was overwhelming. Invitations to perform, requests for interviews, and opportunities to join music programs came quickly, each one presenting decisions she had never imagined having to make. She navigated them cautiously, often seeking guidance from her coach, learning how to balance excitement with focus. She realized that fame, recognition, and opportunity were rewards for her dedication, but they also required responsibility, planning, and the ability to stay grounded. She welcomed the challenge, knowing that this path was the one she had worked toward in silence for so many years. The coach encouraged her to participate in local concerts, community events, and youth music programs. Her first public performance outside the audition hall was nerve-wracking. She had grown used to private practice and the quiet focus of lessons, but playing for an audience again was a test of confidence, endurance, and expression. The moment she stepped on stage, the same calm resolve that had carried her through the audition returned. She closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and let the music flow naturally. Every note resonated with the emotion she had carried inside for years, and the audience responded with warmth, admiration, and applause. Each performance increased her confidence, but also reminded her that growth was ongoing. The coach continued to challenge her, showing her ways to deepen expression, refine technique, and bring even more life into her music. She practiced tirelessly, but she no longer felt the isolation of her early years. Instead, she had guidance, mentorship, and a growing network of people who appreciated her talent. She learned that dedication alone was not enough. It had to be combined with learning, feedback, and openness to improvement. The recognition she began to receive extended beyond her town. Word of her extraordinary performance at the audition hall spread quickly. She received invitations to perform at larger venues in nearby cities, and even at competitions where young musicians gathered to display their skills. With each opportunity, she grew more confident, more capable, and more expressive. The nervousness she had once felt began to transform into anticipation, a feeling that she was stepping into her rightful place in the music world. Yet, even with all the attention, she remained humble. She never let praise cloud her judgment or inflate her ego. She remembered the long nights of solitary practice, the frustration of mistakes, the quiet determination that had brought her here. Every note she played was a reflection of that journey, and she approached each performance with gratitude, respect, and focus. Her mentor often remarked on this, noting that her character, as much as her talent, made her remarkable. He had seen many skilled musicians, but few carried their gifts with such sincerity and humility. She also discovered the impact of her music on others. People would approach her after performances, expressing how her music had moved them, inspired them, or comforted them during difficult times. Some shared personal stories of struggle, loss, or hope, telling her that her playing had touched them deeply. She realized that music was more than notes on a page. It was a way to connect, to communicate emotion, to create understanding. The thought that her music could reach and impact lives gave her purpose beyond personal ambition. Her family noticed the change in her as well. They had always supported her in their own ways, but they now saw the recognition she had earned and the confidence she carried. They were proud yet cautious, aware of the demands that came with her growing opportunities. They watched as she balanced lessons, performances, travel, and practice, realizing that her discipline and determination had become a defining part of her life. The young woman cherished their quiet support, knowing it had shaped her character even as she pursued her dreams. She continued to participate in competitions, concerts, and recitals, each one presenting new challenges. Sometimes she faced performers who were equally skilled, moments where nerves threatened to take over, or situations where unexpected circumstances challenged her focus. Yet every challenge reinforced her resolve. She learned to manage pressure, adapt to new environments, and maintain her emotional connection to the music despite distractions. These experiences strengthened her, not just as a musician, but as a person capable of facing difficulties with grace and resilience. With each performance, she noticed the subtle ways her music affected audiences. Some listeners would close their eyes, letting the sound envelop them. Others would lean forward, captivated by every note. Occasionally, she would see tears in the eyes of strangers, a reminder that the emotions she poured into her music were understood and felt. These moments became her motivation, her reward, and her reminder that her dedication, patience, and perseverance had meaning beyond herself. Her mentor observed growth closely, providing guidance not only on technique, but also on stage presence, interpretation, and communication. He encouraged her to explore different styles, to experiment with expression, and to understand the stories behind the pieces she played. She absorbed everything, practicing not just the notes, but the intention behind them, learning to translate emotion into sound in ways that resonated deeply with her listeners. He often reminded her that music was as much about the heart as it was about skill, and she embraced that advice wholeheartedly. As her reputation grew, she was invited to collaborate with other musicians, participate in workshops, and attend masterclasses led by established artists. These experiences broadened her understanding of music, introducing her to different approaches, styles, and techniques. She embraced the opportunity to learn from others, recognizing that mastery was a journey, not a destination. Each new interaction, each lesson, each performance added depth to her abilities and strengthened her identity as a musician. Despite her growing success, she never lost sight of her origins. She remembered the quiet rooms where she had practiced alone, the nights filled with frustration and determination, the moments of doubt and hope that had defined her early journey. Those experiences became the foundation of her character, grounding her even as she achieved recognition, awards, and opportunities. She learned to balance ambition with humility, confidence with self-reflection, and achievement with gratitude. The young woman also began to inspire others, especially young musicians who had faced similar challenges. She would speak at local schools, sharing her story of perseverance, dedication, and the importance of following one's passion. She encouraged them to practice diligently, to embrace mistakes as opportunities to learn, and to pursue their goals with persistence. Many students approached her afterward, expressing admiration and hope, and she realized that her journey had not only shaped her life, but could also shape the lives of others. Over time, she became more comfortable in the spotlight. Media interviews, public appearances, and social events no longer filled her with fear, but with a sense of purpose. She had learned to remain composed, authentic, and focused, using each opportunity to share not just her talent, but the story behind it. She understood that the recognition she received was a platform, one that allowed her to connect with others, to share emotion, and to inspire. She approached each event with a sense of responsibility, recognizing the power and impact of her presence. Her music continued to evolve. She began to compose her own pieces, translating her personal experiences, struggles, and emotions into original works. These compositions reflected her growth as an artist, blending technical mastery with deep emotional resonance. She performed them at recitals and small concerts, witnessing firsthand the emotional connection her music could create. Audiences responded with admiration, sometimes moved to tears, sometimes inspired to reflect on their own experiences. She felt fulfillment in knowing that her music carried meaning, that it could reach hearts and minds in profound ways. Years passed, and she became known not just as a talented performer, but as a musician with a unique voice, emotional depth, and dedication that inspired others. Her journey from a quiet, determined young woman practicing alone to a recognized artist with a growing following was a testament to perseverance, discipline, and authenticity. She had achieved success not by luck or connections, but through years of hard work, resilience, and unwavering commitment to her craft. She often reflected on the audition hall where it had all begun, the first performance that,